Good morning. I am Shannon Dunstan, and I'm going to be introducing Shannon Decker. Are you ready, Shannon, to get started?
I'm ready when you are.
I'm going to do that.
Oh, so sorry.
No, I thought this was my thing. I hope I'm not supposed to be somewhere else, but I have this listed as mine.
I'll double check. I had it as.
Okay.
Why don't you go ahead, Brenda, and just do it?
Okay. Okay. Are we set then? Austin, are you all ready? Everybody in here?
Yeah, we've got people in from the waiting room now, so I'll continue to admit people throughout as they join, but you are good to go.
All right. Well, thank you. As you just heard, Austin is going to be the one helping us with our tech today. So if you have any issues and need assistance, feel free to chat with him and he can hopefully get things straightened out. Right now, I'm going to introduce our speaker. Shannon Decker is the executive director and co-founder of the Speedy Foundation. She holds a master's degree in educational leadership from the University of Idaho and has 10 years of private and public teaching and administrative experience in Idaho, Nevada, and California. She's a mental health first aid, QPR, and Safe Talk facilitator who offers trainings in Idaho and Utah to further the foundation's mission of promoting mental health education and advocating for suicide prevention. I didn't introduce myself before, but I'm Brenda Stanley. I'm the board chair of the Idaho Children's Trust Fund, and I am very much looking forward to this today. Welcome, Shannon.
Hello. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you, Brenda. I am here to present on a not so sexy, not so fun topic of suicide. But there are some really positive things that we can do in the prevention world. And one of those things is to take a look at our homes and see if we have them as safe as they can be. We're going to be focusing on lethal means today. We're going to do a quick introduction. Thank you for that introduction. A check-in, some of our objectives for today. We're going to be talking about suicide as an overview and some of the statistics, national statistics, as well as local statistics. We're going to take an abbreviated CALM training. CALM stands for Counseling on Access to Lethal Means. We're going to look at some campaigns. The campaign that the Speedy Foundation has adopted is called Is Your Safety On? Lock, Limit, and Remove. And then we have a call to action. If there's something that we don't cover that you have questions on, I'd be happy to address that at the end or speak with you individually. So that is a great overview of me. Brenda shared quite a bit of it. I'm also an advisor to the chief of police in Boise on his community advisory panel. I participate in the Idaho Violent Death Reporting Systems Advisory System, and I'm also an advisor to the United States Olympic and Paralympic Mental Health Task Force. The Speedy Foundation is an organization dedicated to suicide prevention and mental health advocacy. We founded in 2011. At that time, I was a teacher, classroom teacher, and I was attending the University of Idaho, becoming a school administrator. I was advocating for children who, like me, little Shannon here in this picture, really benefited from the public school system in Idaho. That was me at Riverside in Boise the year that it opened. It was a fourth grade performance, and little Shannon wanted to be Basque, and I got to play a Basque dancer in this school performance. I still want to be Basque. I just took an introduction to the Basque language class, and I've traveled to the Basque country, but I am Irish. So today is my day. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. I work a lot in collaboration. I was one of the founders of the Idaho Resilience Project and the Idaho Suicide Prevention Coalition, as well as a lot of other ones. I grew up in Boise. I left for school and I came home. I left again and I came home. And currently I am living in Truckee, California. So I am a ways away, but I do travel outside of COVID times back home to work in Idaho and down in Park City, Utah. So we're going to do a quick check-in. I would like for you in your chat box to just list your name and let us know which weather you identify with today. 1 would be sunshine, and how that relates to how you're feeling as we enter this breakout. 2 would be snowing, 3 would be raining, 4 would be a rainbow, calm after the storm, 5 would be a thunderstorm, 6 would be overcast or cloudy, 7 is windy, and 8 is partly cloudy. Let's check it out. All right. We've got some 4s. Nice rainbow. Shannon, Dustin, good to see you. An 8. Awesome. A 6, a 1, an 8, a 1. Jennifer saying a 7. 8, 8, 8, a 4, an 8. Awesome. A 1. I see a lot of names that I recognize. It's great to see all of you. All right, I'm going to list myself as a 4 as well, mainly because it's been snowing where I'm at and the sun is out today, and also it's St. Patrick's Day. So there's our rainbow. All right, the topic is deep. Suicide is a complex problem with complex solutions. Most of us have been touched by suicide in some way. And so as we go through today's topic, as I discuss suicide safer homes and lethal means, I just want to encourage you to take care of yourself. This might not be the best breakout session for you. It will not hurt my feelings if you decide to exit and go someplace else. This will be recorded, so you'll be able to reference it later. If at any time that you feel like you're in a crisis or in an emergency, I really ask that you reach out for help. You can privately text an administrator, you can step aside, and you can call or text the Idaho Suicide Prevention Hotline. And while I have this up on the screen, I would like for all of you to take out your phones. It's really important that we all have some phone numbers programmed into our phones. So create a new contact if you haven't already done this before, and I want you to list some phone numbers. In Idaho, the phone number 208-398-4357 is the Idaho Suicide Prevention Hotline call center. That phone number can be called or texted to reach a crisis counselor 24/7. 1-800-273-8255 is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number. That is a number that you can call 24/7 nationwide. And if you have an Idaho area code, it will roll you to the Idaho call center. However, if you have an area code outside of the state of Idaho, it will roll you to the call center that is closest connected to you. When you call the national lifeline number, it's going to ask you to press 1 if you're a veteran. That will take you to the Veterans Crisis Line, where it's staffed by folks who are either veterans or have a lived experience, a connection to veterans, a family member. And again, that's 24/7. That national lifeline does not have the capacity to text. And so I always encourage folks to have this number as well. 741-741 is the national crisis text line. And for different people, we have different needs and different communication styles. So having those 3 phone numbers in your pocket is always helpful. Also, anytime that we are in an emergency and we do need some public safety to respond, a paramedic, a police officer, I encourage you to call 911. And if it is a mental health crisis or an emotional crisis, please ask for a CIT trained officer to respond. Across the state of Idaho, more and more of our first responders are becoming trained in crisis intervention training. So it's always great to ask for that. Our hope here is that suicide is preventable. And I say that knowing that people have lost folks to suicide. And I myself have experienced suicide many, many times. My experience with suicide is that I have not attempted suicide. I don't think about suicide. I don't have that component. And I empathize with that through the work that I've been doing over the past 10 years. I've really truly started to understand where a person gets to this place where suicide becomes a solution to an unsolvable problem or an unsolvable emotional pain. But we know that suicide is preventable. And the more that we know about it, the more opportunities we have to prevent suicide. So I don't say that lightly. I know that we've been touched by suicide, and it's not something that we want to think back about. What should I have done differently? It's from this moment forward, what can we do differently to prevent suicide? So in the chat box, I would like for you guys to answer this question. What do you currently do to keep yourself and your family safe in life? Let's step back away from suicide. Just in life, what do you do to keep yourself and your family safe? Constant communication, talking often. What else do we do? Communication, open communication. Checking in frequently. Awesome. There's other things that you do. Praying, checking in, communicating, talking with kids about how to be safe. What does that look like? When you're talking to kids about how to be safe, what does that look like? Suggesting helpful content. Great. A community that makes me feel safe. The ability to surround yourself with a community that makes you feel safe is huge. Good job, Kennedy. Having discussions about drugs and alcohol. Awesome. There's some safety. Does anybody wear a seatbelt when you're driving? Self-defense training. Awesome, Sam. All right. Gun safety training. Great, Jennifer. Discussing mental health openly. Practicing what to do in an emergency. Great. Talking with kids about gun safety. Swim lessons. Nadine, there we go. Swim lessons helps keep yourself or your family safe. I'm going to take two more. Talking with kids about who would be a safe adult to talk with. Yeah, safe adults. Some stranger danger maybe. Wellness visits with a doctor. Fantastic. Okay. Well, there's a lot of things that we do to keep ourselves and our children safe. We buckle up. We do it for ourselves. We do it for our family members. It's a habit. We do it constantly. We do it without thinking. We childproof our homes. Typically, new parents are very aggressive about making sure that their homes are safe. We think about the bathtub. We think about swim lessons. We think about sleep options. How do we lay the baby down to sleep? How do we make the environment safe and nurturing and welcoming? We make sure that things don't fall onto the crib. We secure dressers so that things don't topple over on top of us. We put safety gates in the stairway. I know that for me as a child, I had Mr. Yuck stickers on everything. And I was very aware of poison. We keep chemicals, we keep harmful ingredients away from children. We have things that are mounted to the wall safely. In our dining area, we have different devices that keep children safe. In our kitchen, I don't even have kids, but I always cook everything on the very back burner with the handles pointed in so that no one can reach up and grab. There's a lot of things that we do without even thinking. And then we have very strategic planned conversations with our family members. But just like a lot of things with parenting, we think about it early on in bringing children home. We've got that early intervention, but as children grow up, we have typical adolescence that happens. We have human development. And as parents, as families, we don't always have the training to understand what goes on there. And so we don't necessarily look at our homes the same way that we did when we first brought a new child home. There are differences. There are things that happen in life, and we need to think about, are there changes to the safety and the functionality of our home as we progress and as young adults progress? Typical adolescent development, as well as an emerging mental health condition or substance use, where there might be some higher risks. I I wanted to share that John Roycer, the previous suicide prevention director over at the Idaho Hotline, he and I met with several media outlets. And at one point, there was a media outlet that really wanted to do a special on going into homes and taking a look at how do we look at this through the eyes of maybe a family with young adolescents versus preteens and teens in the home, or even young adults. And what are some things to be aware of? So I like this visual. Unfortunately, at that time, there was a school shooting that happened, and it just delayed that type of content making it to the television. But I was really encouraged about it. And I think that that would be something that would be really cool to see out in the open to bring about a larger conversation. Because we do need to start thinking about how do we safeguard our home. So this was a campaign, I believe originally it was developed back in New Hampshire, South Dakota's adopted it, Nevada's adopted it. But how do we safeguard our home? What are we doing with medications? How do we focus on locking and limiting medications? When families with children in the home are purchasing medication, are they purchasing it at Costco in bulk? Or are they purchasing it in blister packs where it's going to put some time and distance between someone who might be in crisis and access to a lethal means? I think that you guys did an excellent job of this support, listening, asking. Kids all over the world consider suicide. We have very impulsive brains that are developing. And from this conference, I'm sure that there's been a lot of talk about that developing brain. Here's an example where in a crisis, a young person might not be thinking logically, might not be thinking chronologically. Sometimes a young person who considers suicide jumps from a failed grade or a broken relationship to end of life. And in their timeline, they might think again that on Monday, they'd be able to go back and change things, not recognizing that middle plan really was a final end. Firearms. Firearms is the one that we're going to really focus on today. And I want to set forth and say that I am not a firearm owner or operator. I'm not anti-gun. I'm not pro-gun. I'm trying to look at this through a very neutral position. All campaigns that come out should be vetted by folks who are advocates for firearms. The campaign that the Speedy Foundation has adopted was co-created, and it was led by the Utah Sports Shooters Alliance. Suicide prevention and keeping families safe is just as important to gun owners and gun advocates as suicide prevention advocates and folks who are not gun advocates. So if at the end you have any feedback for me on if this was positive, negative, or neutral towards firearms, please list that in the evaluation. I'd be very interested in finding ways to improve the neutrality stance that I take here. Campaigns like that are huge. Here's another one. This is called Safer Homes. This comes from the state of Washington. We do so much to keep our loved ones safe. We have car seats, we have smoke alarms, we have first aid kits, we have bike helmets. We also need to lock and limit access to prescription medications and to firearms. They have an incredible campaign as well, Safer Homes, Suicide Aware. It's wonderful. This is a program that is run from the Forefront group that is housed at the University of Washington. But here we go again. This is an incredible campaign. It's something that could be adopted and modified for the state of Idaho. We know that about 76% of firearm deaths are suicides. Homicides are about 19%. And about 82% of teens who die by suicide with a gun use a family member's firearm. It's the easiest one to access. Here's the scenario. We're going to check back on this in just a little bit, but a 20-year-old with a drug problem has moved back in with his parents after his girlfriend broke up with him. When he stopped going to work, his parents contacted a mental health center and urged him to see a counselor. He refused. He called his girlfriend, hoping to get back together, but she wouldn't speak to him. He felt desperate, intent on suicide. He went to his father's gun cabinet. This is a realistic situation. We can imagine it taking place. We understand where a young person who's struggling with substances, with relationship, with work and purpose and connection might find themselves here. How do we put time and distance between a person in crisis and a lethal means? All right, let's look at some data. In the United States, this data comes from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. They make some incredible graphics. It is data that is 2 years old. So this comes from the CDC from 2019 reports. I'm so sorry. Yes, okay. 2019 data. This was published in 2021. The data that I'm going to show you from Idaho has more current, but the finalized data that we look at from the United States is always about 2 years old. So in 2019, 47,000 Americans died by suicide, making it the 10th leading cause of death. Overall, in the United States, suicide is the second leading cause of death for individuals ages 10 to 34. In states like Utah and Nevada, who have stood up the violent death reporting system and have really started to train up coroners and police officers, they have realized that it is the first leading cause of death for their youth, which leads me to hypothesize that perhaps in Idaho, there are deaths that are being missed, and perhaps it might be a higher cause of death than second. It's a hypothesis. Idaho was one of the last states in the US to stand up the Idaho Violent Death Reporting System. 2 years ago, we started the pilot with just 2 counties. Last year, we included all counties. And by next year, we are going to have very robust information. Data is huge, but in looking at this, we have to humanize it. We have to remember that these were people. These were families, and these were people with jobs. These were people with pets. These were people who were in crisis, and suicide is preventable. There are so many reasons that we need to focus on keeping these people alive. Looking at the United States, the states with the highest suicide rates are some of our neighbors. They are us: Idaho, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico. We have this not so sexy nickname of the suicide belt, and there's a lot that we can do to start to change this. There's cultural pieces that we can change. These are states that have higher than average firearm suicide rates. Nationwide, it's about 51% of suicides are completed with a firearm. In the state of Idaho, it's closer to 61%. In these states, there's a lot of reasons for a higher suicide rate. We have a different culture towards mental and behavioral health care. We are rural by nature, and accessing healthcare can be difficult, it can be cumbersome. But we also have a different culture towards firearms. We have more access to firearms, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. That doesn't mean that we have a higher propensity for suicide. It just means that we have a more immediate access to a lethal means. So in Idaho, it's the 7th leading cause of death in Idaho. Again, from 2019 data that we have available, it is the 2nd leading cause of death for our youth and young adults. It costs the state of Idaho over $300 million in combined lifetime medical and work loss cost in 2010, an average of $1,135,000 per suicide death. And so if we think about the dollar amount that we put in prevention, it is worth so much. For every person that we lose to suicide, we're losing more than $1 million to Idaho's economy. So that alone, when we talk to legislators, talking about the dollars can go a long way in advocating for suicide prevention or prevention in general. And that's it's a heartless feeling way to go, but that's one way that we found success. In looking at this, we've got one person dying by suicide every 21 hours in the state of Idaho. There's a legislator who often talks about a plane crash. There's a plane crash that's happening, once a month in the state of Idaho, where we're losing an entire, airplane full of people. We're not doing anything about it, or we're not doing enough. But we are starting to. We're starting to change. We're starting to see a lot more prevention being stood up, intervention. We've got crisis centers that are being stood up across the state. It's starting to happen. When we look at violent deaths from the state of Idaho, again, this comes from the Idaho Violent Death Reporting System. We can see accidental firearm, very few. Homicide, too many. Illegal intervention, so something that happens with law enforcement. We have suicide, and then we do have a handful of undetermined intents at the end of the year. So in Idaho, when it comes to violent deaths, suicide again is really where we should be spending a large portion of our effort in prevention. If we look at the data, we've got 2018, 19, 20, and 2021. This data is preliminary. The only data that's really been finalized is 2018, and I believe 2019 has been final. Yes, 2018 and 2019 are final. So we have, to date for the year 2021, we have had 5 individuals between the ages of 0 and 17 die by suicide in our state. When we're looking at this cumulatively, we're kind of on track for what we typically see in the state of Idaho. We're not seeing huge numbers. There are some states, there are some areas that are seeing a big variation in numbers due to COVID. The COVID pandemic was the first wave of this global crisis. We had the COVID-19 pandemic, and on top of that, we had the financial pandemic. And if we think of this as a tsunami, the third wave is a mental health crisis. And it is expected that we will see the suicide rate increase in certain areas. When COVID first hit and schools were closing, there were a lot of news stories that came out and said, this is detrimental to youth. We have to open the schools. The suicide rates are insane. But when we went back to the data, especially in the state of Idaho, we didn't see that huge increase. It doesn't mean that that's not the case. Children need schools, families need schools, and we needed to balance that with additional safety for pandemic health. There are school districts. Clark County School District down in Nevada has had 23 deaths since the pandemic has started, and that's a huge spike for them. So it's not necessarily our case. There's a lot of prevention that we can put in place, and hopefully that means that we do have some incredible supports already taking place. Here we have our young adults in Idaho. So again, this is all too much. Every single one of these numbers is a person. This is too much. But suicide has been a problem long before COVID-19, and it's something that we are in the long haul to address. We did see a drop in the suicide rate for ages 15 to 19 in the year 2019. So that was progress. That's some great news. There's a glimmer of hope. And so I want to look at suicide rates from the eyes of youth. How does a young person get there? On the left is a PSA that was developed for the state of Nevada, and on the right, it is from the state of Utah. So these are teens addressing the topic, the target audience being parents.
Mom,
Dad,
try to understand.
sometimes I'm gonna be a little impulsive.
Sometimes I'm gonna be a lot impulsive.
I mean, I'm a teenager.
Like when I went through that really bad breakup. To you, it may have been no big deal. But to me, it was my whole world. It was my whole life.
Remember when I got arrested?
I actually thought that I would never be able to show my face in school again.
And when that rumor about me started spreading
All over social media.
I thought it would never end.
Like, I thought the only solution was for me to end.
Not to freak you out or anything, but the leading cause of death in Utah
For teens,
It's suicide. And nearly half of those suicides are from firearms.
Sorry, but they're usually yours.
So help us out here. Because we may be impulsive, but we want to live.
Almost all the time. But in case there are times where we forget, keep your guns and ammo locked up safely.
Keep your guns and ammo locked up safely.
Locked up safely. Because doing this little thing can make a big difference. I know I can be a little dramatic.
Oh my God! I can get a little mad sometimes.
The fact is, we're teenagers.
Who was Grant? He's just a friend.
I haven't seen you in a month. No, get it.
Sorry.
This is over.
This breakup, it was terrible for me.
What? I didn't know how to fit in.
I even thought
It might be easier if I just ended.
Even though I'm young, I know what suicide is.
And most suicide is done with firearms. And mostly, they're from inside our own homes.
you locked your firearms.
You locked your firearms.
Seems like such a small thing, but it could save a life.
You saved my life.
My life. My life.
You saved my life.
All right, so both of those campaigns were created between the state, the advocacy groups, and the firearm advocacy groups as well. To the point, and each of those young people, the profile represents the profile of the youth that those states have recognized that they're losing. The topics that are important to young people, relationships, and schoolwork, breakups are all very big with young people. In Idaho in 2018, we revised the state suicide prevention plan. And so our state suicide prevention plan is active 2019 to 2023. Overall, we have a goal in the state as well as nationwide to reduce suicide by 20% by the year 2025. That's where we're aiming. One of the best ways that we can do this is to train everyone to normalize asking about suicide and connecting people to help. This is called a gatekeeper training. And the gatekeeper training that Speedy Foundation promotes is called QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer. This is available for free online on demand at the Speedy Foundation /QPR. The State Department of Education also offers QPR training, this same module that we're able to provide. And so let's take a quick look at suicide prevention and at QPR training.
Research shows that the odds of surviving a heart attack in a public place are 10 times greater in regions where thousands of ordinary citizens are trained in CPR. It's called bystander rescue. When someone shows signs of experiencing cardiac arrest, the response of nearby friends, family, or coworkers is critical. The effective use of CPR doubles or triples one's chances of surviving a heart attack. Like CPR, QPR is an emergency intervention for someone experiencing a life-threatening crisis. QPR is easy to learn and easy to remember, but it takes courage to overcome our fears about reaching out to help someone who may be considering suicide. Research also shows that where QPR is widely taught, suicide attempts and deaths decrease. Just like CPR, QPR requires quick, bold, and informed action. Because suicide, like heart attacks, remains a rare event, we must train hundreds to save one, thousands to save hundreds, and millions to save thousands. There is an old Welsh saying, "No great misery goes unspoken." When we have a toothache, we tell people. We don't hide our pain. But because of the stigma and taboo around the word suicide, many people considering suicide don't speak plainly about their suffering. They fear our rejection. They fear that if they say something, we will ridicule them or make fun of them. As a result, people thinking about suicide often use indirect language. They hint at what they're thinking of doing. They send us coded messages, and they suffer in silence. Called Suicide Warning Signs, QPR training teaches you how to recognize these warning signs, quickly decode them, and then question the person in an informed and compassionate manner to learn if they are considering suicide. Just as talking about physical pain helps diminish it, talking about suicide with someone willing and able to listen reduces psychological pain almost immediately. Trained QPR gatekeepers are merchants of hope, and hope helps prevent suicide. Millions of people have now been trained in QPR. Rigorous independent research studies support QPR as effective, and thousands of personal stories assure us that QPR is saving lives. When you use QPR, not everyone will be suicidal. Some people are simply stressed to the breaking point, but they still need help. Help you can give. Please note that you cannot put the idea of suicide into someone's mind. People are either thinking about suicide or they're not. The fear of putting the idea of suicide into someone's head is a myth that keeps us from acting when we should do just the opposite. QPR is a universal intervention for people in pain, whether they're thinking about suicide or not. While it takes a special courage to overcome our fears, we will teach you how to ask about suicide and to offer hope through listening. Listening is the power tool that restores hope in the hopeless. We know you can do this, and we will show you how. Preventing suicide. It's what people do.
I'm going to pause it there to say that we don't have time to do a full gatekeeper training today. And so I hope that you've taken QPR or you're welcome to go take it. It's a training that is open. It's complimentary. We also provide live QPR trainings. There is a cost associated with that. There's some booklets that come with it. And up until COVID, we really encourage that face-to-face training. But the more that we can get this information out there, the more we can train people to talk about it, to talk about this type of pain and these warning signs, these invitations directly. If you have influence, if you've got an organization, if you have a group of people where you can have a conversation, where you could bring a gatekeeper training, even if it's not QPR, there's a lot of other really incredible ones out there, bring that to them to train them up. That can be huge in helping to create a suicide safer home and create suicide safer homes for your individuals, for other young people to be in. Here's one more quick video on QPR.
It may be hard to imagine, but according to the World Health Organization, over 800,000 people die each year by suicide. That is more people than are killed in all the wars and homicides combined. Of these deaths each year, more than 40,000 are Americans. That is one death by suicide every 13 minutes. Suicide affects every region of the world and is the third highest cause of death for people aged 15 to 44. And for every life lost, another 25 people will attempt suicide, often causing serious medical injury or lifelong disability. Today, the greatest loss of life is among working-aged men, 35 to 65 years old. Men of all races and ethnicities are at higher risk. And from the very young to the very old, millions of Americans think seriously about suicide for days, weeks, and even years. Thinking seriously about suicide is itself a kind of misery index, a sign that something is terribly wrong and needs attention. Most often, what needs attention and treatment is clinical depression, a medical condition that is now the leading cause of disability in the world. In America alone, there are an estimated 15 million sufferers. Most of us are touched by suicide. Some of us have lost family members, loved ones, friends, schoolmates, or colleagues. None of us escapes the loss of people we admire and respect, whether they are people we know or are much-loved musicians, artists, and entertainers. If you have lost someone close to you to suicide, then you already know the considerable cost, the tears and awful pain of loss. And if you are one of the millions who have thought seriously about suicide, then you already know just how lonely and terrible it is to suffer alone. Depression, anxiety, substance abuse, bipolar, and thought disorders like schizophrenia all contribute great risk for suicidality. Yet most people suffering from a mental illness do not kill themselves. They get help, they find a way, and they recover to live full and productive lives. And if recovery is possible, that means suicide is preventable. Thankfully, the world is changing. We understand mental illness. We understand suicide. And we know that treatment saves lives. Right now, our teachers don't teach us about depression and suicide. And our faith leaders often struggle to talk openly about these topics. Too often, doctors can't talk to their patients about suicide, even patients who are sitting in their offices planning how to end their lives, perhaps by overdosing on the medication being prescribed to them. The world remains dangerously ignorant about suicide. So to save lives, we must bring this subject out of the shadows. Effective treatment would save thousands of lives around the world. But we must learn to talk comfortably about suicide, and we need your help to start the conversation. Join us in this fight, a fight to save lives. Preventing suicide. It's what people do.
Okay. And so I know that I've mentioned that I have lost several close people to me to suicide. One of the first friends that I lost to suicide was when we were 18. And we came from a place where there was a lot of stigma and taboo around the topic of suicide. We came from a Catholic school setting, and from all that I had talked about, from all that I knew, at least at an academic level, maybe not what I felt, but academically what I knew and how to navigate that situation as a teenager, was that it was wrong, that it was a mortal sin, and it just wasn't an option. And so when I could feel a friend giving me those invitations that she was not doing well, that she was considering suicide, that she was looking at her longevity of her lifespan, I didn't talk about it directly with her. I asked her a lot of indirect questions, and I was not empowered to ask her directly, are you having thoughts of suicide? I did go to her father, and I talked to him in a circle. I asked him a lot of questions. I gave him a lot of information, but none of it was, I'm concerned that she's suicidal. I'm afraid she's going to take her life. And unfortunately, she did end up taking her life. And it took me another 15 years before I took QPR class. And I understood that we have to talk about things directly, that we have to normalize talking about suicide and connecting people to care. My last teaching position in Idaho was out in West Ada. And at that time I had a second grader, and that second grader used some of that indirect language where she said, my family will be better off when I'm gone. And as an educator, I went back to a PowerPoint that I had on what to do for child abuse. How do you report it? What can you say? What can you not say? And at no point in that presentation that I took every single year, and I had a printed PowerPoint, at my desk, I knew where it was. And nowhere in that did it say what to do when the child was considering hurting themselves. And so I know that there's a lot of capacity to build in gatekeeper trainings in education, in healthcare, in families, in the workforce, and the power that it has. So a module that has been built in addition to QPR is a modified CALM, Counseling on Access to Lethal Means. At the end of this presentation, there is a link to a more robust CALM training that you're able to take. It's also complimentary. But this traditionally, when we think about suicide prevention, we focus really on why. Why did this happen? What could we have done differently? Why? But we're really starting to understand things better when we think about how. How did this person's suicide play a crucial role in whether they live or die? How did they take their life, or how did they attempt to take their life? If we can understand how, That's where we can focus prevention efforts. So we've got some examples here. Sri Lanka, one of the leading causes of death by suicide in Sri Lanka was pesticides. There was restrictions placed on the sales of the most highly human toxic pesticides in the mid to late 1990s. And in Sri Lanka, between 96 and 2005, they saw the suicide rate drop by 50%. So the non-fatal poisonings and suicide by other methods did not drop. However, the most lethal means, which was by pesticides, dropped by 50%. In the United Kingdom, domestic gas was the leading method of suicide. By 1970, almost all domestic gas in the UK became non-toxic, and the suicide rates dropped by nearly a third. Again, the drop was driven by the gas suicides. Non-gas suicides increased slightly. However, when we think about what is our most pressing concern, what is the most deadly, the most lethal means that we see in our population, if we target that with prevention efforts, we can see that those deaths don't occur. So why does reducing access to lethal means prevent some suicides? Again, as we saw in those two examples, it's not all. And in some cases, a person might choose a different method, as we saw in the United Kingdom. But we know that suicidal crises are often relatively brief. We talk about the difference of 5 to 10 minutes, that sitting in crisis for a person to have at least 10 minutes, sometimes they can resolve that crisis. Suicide attempts are often undertaken quickly with little planning. That's not always the case. And if you've taken a Gatekeeper training, we've talked about planning, suicide planning, and then also safety planning. But they can occur quickly, especially in youth, where we have that immature and impulsive mind. Some suicide methods are more deadly than others. Thinking about firearms, those are incredibly deadly. 90% of those who survive even a nearly lethal attempt do not go on to die later by suicide. Firearms are the leading suicide method in the United States. Gun owners and their families are about 3 times at a higher risk of suicide than non-gun owners. And this is not because they're more suicidal. Gun owners are no more likely to be mentally ill, to think about suicide, or to attempt suicide than non-gun owners. Rather, they're more likely to die in a suicide attempt because the guns are more lethal than other methods. There isn't an opportunity in many cases for an intervention. And again, going to lived experience, I think anytime that we can hear from someone who has experienced something, it will be huge. To understand from their perspective, to build capacity and empathy. And so this comes from Forefront, that had that incredible campaign from the University of Washington. We're going to listen to about half of this story.
I was living in Thailand for a couple years. I went and worked there, and I got this tattoo, and it says in Thai on the bottom, "Some birds aren't meant to be caged." I would wake up in the morning, and each day I tell myself I'm gonna go to class. Like, I'm not that far behind. I'm gonna go to class. And I wouldn't be able to do it. It just felt so overwhelming. So I'd go back to sleep, and then I'd watch TV, and I just felt so pathetic. I didn't know many people, and I was already starting to feel depressed, but it got really bad. And I started isolating a lot more. Alcoholism also runs in my family, and I started drinking to help just get through the day. Nothing was changing. I bought a lot of alcohol. I bought pills again, but they had never worked. And I bought a rope. And so I went home and I just couldn't think of waking up the next day to the same life. But when I tried to tie it to the pipe that was in my room, it wouldn't hold. And with that, I just gave up. Like, when you're that depressed, it took everything I had to make a plan. And it was that one thing that didn't work that kept me alive.
So we're going to stop it right there. Will a person just use something else if they can't get a gun or they can't obtain another means that they are seeking? Sometimes yes, but almost every other method is going to be less lethal than a firearm. There's going to be a greater chance that a person won't die in their attempt, but there will be an opportunity for an intervention. We can reduce a suicidal person's access with some simple steps by reducing access to firearms at home, having counselors and providers and family members ask at-risk people. Oftentimes we don't think about doing this. And then temporary safety intervention, which of course is not anti-gun. Family and friends can protect a suicidal person by temporarily storing the firearms away from the home, having a trusted person outside the home hold on until the situation improves. There are often storage facilities, police departments, gun clubs, gun stores who will store firearms until the crisis improves. If that's not an option, there are gun locks, grab new locks, get a new combination. The VA distributes little cable locks. You can keep ammunition out of the home or locked separately, and you can remove the key components of a gun to keep it more safe. This is just a little anecdote that when Abraham Lincoln was a young man, he was very depressed and suicidal, and he told a friend, and a friend said of him, Lincoln told me that he felt like committing suicide often. So seeing these suicide warning signs, Lincoln's neighbors mobilized to keep him safe, watching over him. They removed his knives and his pistol. They pulled together the same kind of safety net that QPR gatekeepers can build today, making sure that President Lincoln did not have access to the means of suicide. And it was said that when he again did become depressed later in life, that he didn't dare even carry a pocket knife, limiting access to lethal means. We can start these conversations. These are conversations that need to start in public awareness campaigns. Anyone, everyone, everywhere. We know that drunk driving rates did not start to decrease until we created a campaign that empowered other people. Friends don't let friends drive drunk. We were empowered to recognize impairments, to take away the keys, and to connect that person to safety, to get them home safely. We can do the same thing with suicide prevention. We can all become gatekeepers, and we can start to have conversations about lethal means. We can have these at gun shops, within healthcare systems, education systems, public safety. Where else? I'm going to go ahead and skip this in the interest of time, but it'll be there. This comes from Forefront on how to have a conversation. What does it sound like when we're talking about lethal means? This is an example from a gun shop. Zero suicide. This is a framework. It's the foundational belief that suicidal deaths for individuals under the care of health and behavioral health systems are preventable. For systems that are dedicated to improving patient safety, zero suicide prevents this challenge. It's a practical framework for a system-wide transformation towards safer suicide care. There are many healthcare systems in the state of Idaho and across the world who are adopting zero suicide, and part of that is lethal means counseling with patients who are experiencing mental health crises. This is the campaign that the Speedy Foundation really stands behind, and we are running these advertisements, these PSAs on various news stations. But for gun owners, protecting the family involves more than just keeping them safe from an accident or attack. It also involves being aware of the warning signs of suicide and the steps to prevent it. Together, we can protect our family, our friends, and our freedom. Here's a quick PSA.
Last year, I was at my lowest, going through some pretty serious depression. A couple of friends of mine stopped by the house and said they were worried about me. Said they'd feel a lot better if they could hold on to my firearms until things turned around. I think they saved my life.
If your loved ones are struggling, talk to them about temporarily storing their guns away from their home, because things do get better.
All right, we can store those guns safely and securely when not in use. The same is true of medication. The same is true of any other type of lethal means that a young person or that a person in crisis might identify in that house. In safety planning, which you talk about in gatekeeping, you can ask about what methods they're thinking about. And that's when you can start to put safety in the house. You can think about the obvious ones like medication and firearms. And if they have come up with additional ways, then you can safely secure those items in your house as well. Limit, lock the guns and ammo separately. Don't keep the ammunition in the home at all. Have somebody temporarily keep the gun until things improve. These PSAs they speak Idaho to me when we're looking at these. This is the demographic of what we're seeing in our state.
In the scope of a lifetime, 10 minutes may seem like no time at all. But when it comes to suicide, 10 minutes is often long enough to reconsider the decision to end one's own life. If you have a friend or family member who is struggling with suicide or depression, talk to them about temporarily storing their firearms away from their home, because even a 10-minute delay can make a lifetime of difference. Let's help end tragic firearm deaths.
All right, we're going back to our scenario, that 20-year-old. He was intent on suicide. He went to his father's gun cabinet, but the guns were gone. He found a razor. He cut his wrists. His parents found him an hour later, and they brought him to the hospital where he was treated, and he agreed to get help. Anytime we can put time and distance between a person who is in suicidal crisis and a lethal means, we have the ability to save a life. My call to action to you is to become a gatekeeper, host a gatekeeper training, bring change to your area of influence. And if at this conversation, somebody came to mind, or if you found yourself experiencing any type of reaction, please reach out and have a conversation. Reach out to the hotline, reach out to someone that you trust, reach out to a licensed counselor, reestablish care. That's huge. Another piece that we can always do is we can get rid of any drugs that we don't need in the house. Vape pens, sharps. The DEA has drug take back days throughout the year. This is one that's coming up through Region 4 in Idaho on April 24th. So this presentation, again, has been adapted. There's some additional information on the topic, and I am always available. There was one question about, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. There was a question about county data, so let me open that really quickly. Are there any other questions that you have? I'm also going to bring up the Idaho. Okay, I'm ready to share. Here we go. All right. Get Healthy Idaho is where you can find up-to-date suicide death information if this is helpful for you. You can find everything by county. I'm just going to show you suicide data by county. This was updated on March 17th. This is what we're looking at. Okay, are there any other questions? I don't know where we're at with time. I apologize if we're short or over. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Austin, we're right on time. Okay, phew.
You did wonderful. This is so interesting, Shannon. I really appreciate your time. It is a very difficult topic to listen to. especially seeing these numbers. I live in Bingham County, which I consider such a small area, and to see 11 and not, it just is. I mean, it's hard to believe, and it's also just really shocking, but very powerful presentation. Yes, and just really appreciate you taking the time to share it with us.
Yeah.
One thing I want to make sure that we all do is the survey at the end. We really use those numbers and those and just that feedback in planning these conferences. So please take some time to fill that out and give us your thoughts. We would greatly appreciate it. I keep looking at myself. I look like such a goofball. Anyway, I look forward to our next our breakout session. And then don't forget, we've got the panel discussion coming up after that. So again, Shannon, thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for sharing this with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to end on suicide is preventable. We all have a role to play. There's a lot that we have the power to do, and the more that we understand and feel comfortable having a conversation about, the more power we have.
All right, thank you again, everyone.
I'm dropping the link for our next session, which is our networking session, in the link or in the chat. We will be opening up that room momentarily. It's in an account that's being used for one of these workshops that is not wrapped up yet. So if you click on it, you may get a message that says host has another meeting in progress, but just sit tight on that screen. And as soon as we are able to open up that room, we will get started.